They put a chain on my pump house door and told me I had 24 hours to surrender a strip of my ranch to their HOA. So I did the only smart thing I could do. I hit record. 10 days later, I was on their Lake Festival stage holding an old deed, while the sheriff served their HOA president papers she couldn't talk her way out of. And the part that still makes my jaw tighten is this. None of it had to happen if she'd just kept her hands off my water. My name's Remy Carter. I live on the western ridge outside a lakeside development called Summit Shores Estates. I'm not in their HOA, and my land sits outside their recorded boundary. But my property has an old pump house and intake canal that pulls creek water into my irrigation channel. And yeah, it also feeds the diversion that keeps their community lake from turning into a mud bowl in late summer, which is exactly why this turned into such a mess. That pump house is mine, that land is mine, and the paperwork on it is older than their subdivision. But on the morning it started, none of that felt like protection. It felt like a target on my back. It was cold, still gray out. The kind of Montana morning where your breath feels sharp, and I walked down to check my pressure gauge and saw a thick galvanized chain wrapped around my pump house hinges, like somebody decided they could lock up my property for fun, and a bright orange HOA notice slapped on the door. Notice of violation, unauthorized water structure, removal order pending. Signed by Bethany Crowell, HOA president. I stared at it long enough to feel irritation turn into heat, and then I heard tires on gravel. A white Lexus rolled up where my private road meets their maintenance trail, and Bethany stepped out like she owned the dust clipboard tight to her chest. Sunglasses on like armor, or Carter, she said, already walking toward me. We need to resolve this before the county gets involved. I didn't answer her right away. I held the notice up for my camera and said, "You want to explain why you chained my pump house?" She didn't blink. This structure sits inside the Summit Shores Shoreline Management Zone. She said the board voted to require either a cooperation agreement or surrender of the 70-foot corridor. I laughed once because it was so bold, it sounded fake. "You want me to surrender land," I said to an HOA I don't belong to. Her smile tightened. "Everyone who shares water access falls under Summit Shores," she replied. "Join the HOA or vacate the shoreline." Then she slid a stapled packet toward me. Crooked staples. Cheap ink, and inside was a map highlighting a strip of my ranch in HOA yellow, plus a compliance fee due immediately, and a paragraph that basically said, if I didn't cooperate, the HOA would secure the area for community safety. "Not happening," I said. Bethany's voice stayed sweet, but her eyes went hard. "If you resist, we file with the county," she warned, calm as a woman ordering lunch. "After that, the board has options." I asked options. "Like what?" She smiled without warmth. "Like removal," she said, and she glanced at my pump house like it was furniture in her way. "I'll expect your signature by tomorrow." Then she got back in her Lexus and drove off like she'd already won. I cut the chain off and tossed it in the dirt, but that confidence bothered me because people don't trespass that smoothly unless they believe the law leans their direction, and I could feel it in my gut. She thought she had a card I didn't know about. So I called Sarah Whitfield, the attorney I trust when paperwork starts smelling like a weapon. She answered fast, and the first thing she said was, "Tell me you didn't sign anything." "Not a chance," I told her, "but the HOA president thinks she owns my shoreline." "Send me everything," she said. I texted photos, and when she called back, her voice was sharp. "This notice isn't enforceable," she said. "Their jurisdiction ends at their boundary, and your parcel is outside their CC&Rs. But Bethany's acting like she's already got paperwork lined up, so don't treat this like it's just petty HOA nonsense. I remember staring at that orange notice again and thinking, great, so it's not legal. It's just loud. The next day, I saw how coordinated it was. 2 guys in kayaks drifted across my intake line, wearing vests that read, "Community Patrol." One of them filming me like I was the threat, and when I yelled for them to get off my line, they just smiled and said, "Observation only." A neighbor named Kyle stopped by my gate and said, "You're not the first." She buried Mrs. Halverson in notices until she sold her lot. Then Bethany bragged it was for community harmony. Kyle looked embarrassed, saying it out loud, like he hated that he'd gotten used to it. Most folks just pay because they're tired, he told me, and they don't want drama. Sarah called again that afternoon. She sent me a boundary expansion proposal, she said. Not approved, but they're behaving like it is. Your canal is labeled shared infrastructure. So Bethany wasn't just harassing me. She was laying tracks for a takeover, trying to rewrite my land into their system before anyone could stop it. 2 days later, she came back with props, HOA SUVs, a contractor with red caution tape, and a volunteer inspector in a county sedan who wouldn't meet my eyes. Bethany announced an emergency safety review, like she was doing everyone a favor, and the contractor moved toward my valve wheel. I stepped in front of him. "Touch that valve and you're trespassing," I said. Bethany snapped. "We have authority under our water bylaws," I said. "Your bylaws don't cross this fence." The inspector mumbled something about a preliminary inspection, like saying it makes it real. I raised my voice. "Stop. Nobody touches anything." Bethany's smile tightened, and I added, "Sheriff's on his way." That tiny blink she did told me I'd finally hit something she didn't control. Sheriff Jake Morales rolled up a minute later, dust behind his tires, and he asked one simple question. "Do you have a warrant or county order?" Bethany tried to launch into a speech about safety, but Jake cut her off. "HOA authority stops at the boundary," he said, then told the inspector and contractor to get off my land before he cited them. Bethany hissed, "Sheriff, you're enabling him to endanger families," and Jake just stared at her and said, "Ma'am, leave." When they finally drove off, Jake stayed a moment and said, "She's ramping up. Watch your back." That night I barely slept. Not because I was scared of Bethany specifically, but because I hate being cornered by confusion, you know what I mean. So Sarah and I went to county records. We pulled plat maps, canal filings, and the original Valley Water Agreement. Halfway through dusty binders, the story flipped. The intake canal existed on maps decades before Summit Shores. The lake didn't. My ranch held senior water rights, and there was a clause that mattered more than anything Bethany had printed on her orange paper. If the downstream association interfered with the intake corridor or harassed the rights holder, their lake use easement could be revoked. That's when Bethany's endgame snapped into focus. She wasn't chasing dues. She was chasing control, because control of the intake meant control of the lake, and the lake meant property values fees. Leverage the whole shiny community brand. Emergency notices started appearing on my gate. Invoices showed up under my wiper flyers. Called my pump a contamination risk, and she scheduled meetings that basically told residents, "Support us or your lake dies." You know what I mean? She was building fear so people would beg for emergency authority. And while everyone argued about safety, she could take the intake piece by piece. Then one night, the creek sounded wrong, thinner and louder, and I ran down with a flashlight. My intake gate had been cut, Slats sheared flow, surging hard, and on the rock shelf sat bolt cutters, still wet. Yeah, that happened. I photographed everything and called Jake. He filed it as sabotage and warned me it probably wouldn't be the last move. I remember standing there in the dark, thinking she's willing to damage the thing she claims to protect just to prove a point. The next morning, Sarah showed up with a folder and a look that said someone finally slipped. An anonymous HOA board member had forwarded internal emails, and they read like a playbook. If we control the intake, we control the lake. Push the narrative that his system is unstable. I'll handle the inspector, he owes me a favor, and the line that made my blood go cold. If necessary, disrupt the flow to prove instability. Sarah looked at me and said, "This is intent." Then she opened the deed history again and pointed to a secondary easement clause buried like a landmine. "This is the kill switch," she said. "Harassment, obstruction, interference. Immediate forfeiture of lake use rights permanently." I sat there quiet, feeling power settle in my chest like a cold weight, because Bethany didn't just cross a line. She detonated it. People always ask why I didn't shut the lake down right then. I'll be honest, the thought sat there like a loaded tool. But Sarah was right. That's nuclear. Innocent families get hit first while Bethany plays victim. So we went surgical and public. We built the binder tabbed every notice, every invoice, every photo, every email, every witness statement. And we chose the one place Bethany couldn't bury it in committee, her own lake celebration, where she planned to announce new fees and crown herself the savior. Lake Day looked cheerful on the surface food tents, kids running banners everywhere, a band warming up, and Bethany strutted onto the stage in a white blazer like she was accepting an award. She started preaching about our shared treasure under threat, then pointed at me and said, I refused oversight, endangered families, and forced the board's hand. She announced mandatory water fees and emergency authority, and a few people clapped because confidence is persuasive when you don't know the facts. When she opened the floor for comments, I walked forward with my binder. Her smile hiccuped the moment she saw papers in my hands. Mr. Carter. This isn't the time, she said into the mic. I climbed the steps, took the microphone gently and said, This is exactly the time. The crowd went quiet fast, because even people who fear Bethany still love a public showdown. I held up the certified water rights agreement. This says my property controls the intake feeding this lake, I said. Then I held up county diagrams showing dependency, and I could see heads turning, people doing math in real time. Then I held up the easement clause and read the line out loud. Slow interference with the intake corridor or harassment of the rights holder triggers immediate forfeiture of lake use easements. Bethany snapped. He's lying, and tried to grab the mic back. I leaned away and said, Read it yourself. Then I held up the internal emails. These are from your board, I said. They talk about controlling the intake, pushing a contamination narrative, handling a volunteer inspector, and disrupting flow to prove instability. The crowd made that low sound people make when their stomach drops, because now it wasn't rumor, it was words on paper. Sheriff Jake stepped forward, calm as stone, and deputies moved toward Marcus Hale, the developer who'd been hovering behind Bethany all morning with that smug smile. I lifted the last papers. These are revocation notices, I said, effective immediately for Bethany Crowell and any board members involved in harassment and interference. Bethany snapped. You can't. Jake took the notice from my hand and served it to her right there. A deputy put a hand on Marcus's shoulder for questioning about the sabotage report, and Marcus did that thing where his confidence evaporates and his eyes start looking for exits. Bethany looked out at the crowd and realized her power had always been one thing: people believing she was untouchable. The moment the law stood beside the paperwork, she wasn't a president anymore. She was just a trespasser who put it in writing. And that's where I want to hear from you, because this is the part people argue about long after the stage goes quiet. If you were me, would you have shut off the lake for everyone? The moment they chained your pump house, even if it punished innocent families, or is the right move? What I did keep the water flowing while stripping power from the people who abused it. Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where you land and why. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that tried to act like a government hit, like subscribe and share your story, because silence is how people like Bethany win.